as the China today. But it was Deng Xiaoping that made the country drink a big Red Bull and shoot up economically, opened the country to forward investment in technologies, and also guided the Communist Party through that development process and made it even stronger than it had been previously.
So I would like to get to today's China, President Xi Jinping. But first, I'd like to try to maybe demystify the Great China threat, so to speak, or find a way to interpret much of what we hear in the news. China is often demonized in the West, sometimes compared to the Soviet threat 30, 40 years ago. You, as part of this trying to understand or interpret things a little bit for people who don't know China so well, you have spoken about a school of thought or a body of literature known as the China is not 10 feet tall body of literature. What is that referring to, and could you elaborate a little bit?
Well, so the China's not 10 feet tall comes from an opinion piece published in I think it was Foreign Affairs, just this last, within this year, I think it was that soon. And it really looked at this, as you say, this myth that Americans in the West in particular have of China as being this, like as if the country is run by an infallible supercomputer, and that every decision that the government ever makes, the party makes, just seems to be right. Well, one, we only hear about the choices the party makes typically that worked. That's what happens when you control information in the mass media and the digital platform in China.
Right.
And so there are more and more folks saying, well, if we take a step back and take a deep breath, that party is as fallible as any other party. Those leaders wake up in a bad mood and are just as likely as any other world leader to make a bad decision that day. And so we should really stop treating the Communist Party as this perfect machine. So that goes to capability, right? China is as fallible as any other country, and the fact that the folks running that humongous mechanism have really only been developing modern, the kind of skills for public administration and governance that serve the country best for the last 30 years, right? Not even since 1949. And so that goes to capability is not infallible. Second is motive. It astounds me when people go, oh my gosh, can you believe what the Chinese are doing? Yes, I can, because they're a rising great power. And so what they do should come as no surprise to anyone who lives in a great power or has ever read about a great power. And so, if we demystify capabilities as well as motive, it's all actually fairly straightforward stuff. There's no mystery science. There's no supercomputer in a cave somewhere, at least that I know of. But they wouldn't tell me, would they?
And that's very helpful. They are a great power. The U.S. is a great power. We're fallible. We make mistakes. They're going about things a certain way. Now this is a rhetorical question. This isn't. It's a loaded question.
I just scoot back a little bit here.
Well, and there's no answer for it. Maybe towards the end of the evening we'll be somewhere closer. But if I were to start this discussion differently, I may have said, China, friend or foe? There's no answer to that. I suspect it's neither, somewhere in the middle, not sure. But it's just something to think about.
Okay.
I do want to talk a little bit about President Xi. He's very popular, both with the younger generation and the older generation. President Xi Jinping became head of the Chinese Communist Party in 2012, then I think president a year after, elected by the People's Congress. he seems like he's kind of a rock star, and I don't know if you can speak much about him. Some say that Xi is China's most powerful leader since Mao. Would you agree, or?
I think that's probably a pretty fair statement. You line him up against Deng Xiaoping, you line him up against Mao. They've all strengths and weaknesses, but for what Xi has been able to accomplish in the complexities of the 21st century, are just as astounding as the last 30 years of what his predecessors did to bring hundreds of millions of people in China out of poverty. Right. But I think the complexities of rule in today's information age, to maintain one-party monopoly of power, to continue to kind of inculcate that great devotion, we're talking glorious leader kind of devotion in many
right.
corners of China.
Right.
And so to manage the back end of the technologies, the message, the production, and to crank out enough successes to keep people very happy. He's certainly found a good formula there.
So is China's stunning, some would say, rise to power that we've seen, the modern China that we've spoken about, is this rise to power because of Xi? Were they sort of parallel? Could it have happened without Xi, with another leader?
Well, it wouldn't have happened without Deng Xiaoping. And
without Deng?
Without Deng, absolutely.
Okay.
And the chances that Deng would have disappeared from the scene are many, right? During Mao's reign, twice purged, thrice risen. His family was subject to, the humiliations of the Cultural Revolution. And that guy could have just disappeared from China's history at multiple points in time. So he, as a person, individual, but also his ability to maneuver within the party. I mean, no sooner was Mao dead, Deng was not, he wasn't the first, he wasn't the transitional leader after Mao, but he made himself just in a perfect position to take over by 78. And then dragged the old guard who had been stoking the Cultural Revolution along the way to liberalize China's economy in terms of opening up to Western investment, et cetera, all very controlled, very moderated. That planted the seeds for the exponential economic growth that we see. Now, if you just line up economic growth rates, then the growth rates under Deng far exceed those of Xi Jinping. But it costs a lot of money to grow China's economy the size it is now, more so than it had. So what Xi's contribution is I think his ability to maintain, at least apparent unity in the party, and to in the face of the triumph, the unabashed victory of liberalism proclaimed by Francis Fukuyama back in the early 90s, the Communist Party is as strong as ever. So that's really where Xi comes in, Xi Jinping comes in.
Okay, so, and to expand on that a little, I'm going to turn up the volume a bit. So, in earlier this month, the Washington Post had a story. Xi Jinping's crackdown on everything is remaking Chinese society. Mm-hmm. Okay. Crackdown on everything. What is this referring to, and what is exactly is happening?
Well, so because Xi Jinping has such command over the Communist Party, its members, he is able to kind of implement these really, especially for Westerners, just the oddest kinds of control factors, ranging from young people accessing online video games, mm-hmm. right? Limiting this to just a couple of hours a week and only on the weekends. Can you imagine a leader doing that in the United States? The current campaign has to do with this kind of interesting kind of effort to protect masculinity in China. And the Communist Party actually has, there's a term that just about literally translates to sissy.
The ban on sissy culture.
The ban on sissy culture.
That's a real thing.
It's a real thing. Now, so K-pop stars or J-pop stars or Chinese performers who kind of tweeze their men who tweeze their eyebrows or take on what are perceived to be kind of traditional gender looks,
right,
are now subject to losing their spot on the internet, losing access to online sales devices. Then, of course, it gets even more serious to control of the Uyghur population in the West, the continued crackdown on corruption, which on one hand is a good thing, on the other, it's also a political tool, an outright political tool for control. So it's really the permeation of the party and its efforts to kind of come back into society and exert control over that society in the name of stability and national interest is becoming ever more invasive under Xi Jinping.
I'm just reading about this, and it's interesting if no one is familiar with any of this, because on the one hand, you can look at China's rise, their economic prowess and successes, and say maybe they're doing something right. But then you see this other sort of draconian, this authoritarian crackdown on everything. In addition, adding on to what you said, they're banning certain karaoke songs that can't be sang. And then, similar to what you said, another Wall Street Journal story just talked about this actress, Zhao Wei. You familiar with this? She's sort of the Reese Witherspoon of China. She's been completely scrubbed, any presence from the internet. 86 million fans. I guess they don't count. This isn't a mind control. What are they trying to? Is someone like this singer or some of these? Are they a threat to a norm of what should be the?
Well, so right, make no mistake. Even in the year 2021, that the Chinese Communist Party is the party that sets the kind of approves, sets the norms, the value, or defines the values that determine the norms that then shape the laws. And so your source for authority, right, your source of inspiration still should be, at the end of the day, the party. And so if you're a popular movie star or a singer or something like that, and you've got 86 million fans, friends, whatever the case might be, then people actually are being influenced by you and might start to look for other areas for their values or what their norms should be, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I mean, as a father of two teenage girls, and I see the influencers that seem to be, influencing their generation, and I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I wish this wasn't happening. But the Communist Party has actually done what many parents have probably wanted to do, and they don't just limit exposure, they will set examples and remove people from the web, such as what's apparently happening with this starlet.
Frightening stuff. And yet, Xi is still very popular.
Well, yeah, because he's the great patriarch. He's not going after just anyone who has a lot of friends or friend group. I feel like such a dad when I try to talk about social media. But these are not, the argument is these are nauseous influence on youth culture. And we can say, oh, it's a free world, let influencers teach our children whatever they want. Or we can say what the parents think, and that's, no, we're not going to tolerate this. And so they take a very paternalistic, as the party always has, perspective on controlling these influences.
Father knows best.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Just a little bit more on this, and then I want to get to actual China, U.S.-China relations. But two things I want to ask you about. In the education curriculum, Xi Jinping thought. This is a real thing, correct? Mm-hmm. Xi Jinping thought. Mm-hmm. What is this?
So now enshrined in the Constitution along with socialism with Chinese characteristics. I think for you guys, if there's one place to look, it would be his address to the People's Congress in 2017, where he laid out ideas such as obviously the China Dream, which was not new in 2017, but the notion that the dream of the Chinese people in China as well as outside of China, PRC, is for the country to stand up and be recognized as a proud power that deserves the respect of other nations, that no longer has to put up with the interference and the machinations of other great powers, right? So China has stood up. That China cannot be separated. There's actually, it's called the 6 innies policy, that China can never be separated by any power at any time through any means, by et cetera. There's like 3 more innies, I can't remember. Basically saying that the unity of the Chinese state territorially as well as politically is sacrosanct. That includes Taiwan, that includes Hong Kong, that includes Tibet, Macau, Xinjiang, and elsewhere. And so in addition to that is a clear departure from Deng Xiaoping's 24-character strategy. Now, it didn't happen with Xi Jinping in 2017, but he pretty much put the nail on the coffin, and that was that Deng very much was guided by the notion that China should not take a leadership role, China should not show its abilities, should never, well, just, you know what, if the Americans wanted to be the global hegemon and to bear the cost for that, they could go right ahead, and China's going to do its thing and, kind of take care of business later. Well, Xi Jinping has said China is now ready to take global leadership. China will become a global military power by, the end of by the 2040s. Right? And so he has, the World Health Organization, with the COVID outbreak, Trump's retreat from the WHO, guess who filled in the space? China did. And we see that happening in many parts and organizations, IGO as well as NGO throughout the world. This is a major sea change to what kind of China had been previously. So those are just a couple of the highlights for that.
And by the way, I don't know if there's any questions from the audience, but we're definitely going to allow for those as well. And I don't know if we have cards to write those on, or just getting back to China, friend or foe, the U.S. Not a loaded question, but what would you say best defines U.S.-China relations today? Or said differently, what would you describe as the status of the current U.S.-China relationship? And does it matter who is president? Sort of 2 questions. But
so let me see if I can do this briefly. As a college professor, we have a terrible time being brief. You think of it as a continuum. 1972, U.S.-China, Nixon's visit and opening of China that would culminate in 1979 with the formal diplomatic relationship between the PRC and the U.S. The American vision, in addition to be very self-serving and realpolitik, we needed China to balance the Soviet Union with the Cold War. We also wanted China to promise us not to get involved in the Vietnam War that was still raging. So once we secured those 2 things, we walk away thinking, oh, you know what? We have a real chance here to kind of develop this mentor-mentee relationship with China. The American love affair with China goes back to the 1900s and even prior to that. This desire to help the quote-unquote poor man of the East, right? Develop, YMCA, YWCA. There's a rich history of those organizations in pre-communist China and even afterwards. So we went from this optimism, like we could help kind of remake China in a modern liberal image, right? And it was then strategic partnership under the first Bush administration, the Clinton administrations, And so there was still a real hope that we could work together and grow together, et cetera, and that China would kind of behave in terms of allowing the U.S. to run the show. This lasted, into the first Obama term, where you start to encounter terms like frenemy. The U.S. and China were frenemies, both friend and enemy. And then in 2012, what is it, I think, with the pivot to Asia, where that is when the American tone towards China changes from one of strategic partnership to you see the beginnings of, oh, hey, wait a minute, there's something here that needs to be contained. Right? Now, it was half-hearted, it was a measly effort, but at least it was something that started to shift the American attitude. Well, then you get into strategic competition under the Trump administration, okay, and just an inch away from labeling the relationship one of strategic competition, strategic challenge. We're on the cusp of that right now. And Biden administration in its first half a year, give or take, has really not done anything to dissuade us from, we are on the cusp of a strategic challenge. So I think that's an answer.
It's an answer.
I probably could have saved 45 seconds and just got to the...
So, but Biden is kind of continuing this...
The general theme, yeah.
Theme. I want to... President Biden came in the beginning of this year. In March, are you familiar with Anchorage?
The meetings in Anchorage.
The meetings in Anchorage. Can you speak to that a little bit? Things got a little bit testy. This was the first face-to-face meeting with Biden officials and Chinese officials, but it was turned into sort of a sparring match.
It was a very important message that China wanted to send the United States very early, send the Biden administration early on. Right? They had just gotten over 4 years of the relationship with Trump, which was terrible. All right? And so Biden comes in, and they smell weakness. The Democratic Party has always had kind of a certain approach to China that was different from the Republicans. And so they wanted to send a signal. And so their representatives at that meeting lectured the Americans for 45 or so minutes, although they were only allotted, give or take, 15 to really make their opening remarks. And they said, look, we're not here to be condescended to. You're not going to lecture us. You got your own problems. And basically did that in 45 minutes. So it's an important signal, again, as part of China has stood up. China is no longer rising. It has risen. And then secondly, it was a test. So does the Biden administration, having had this encounter, now kind of back down and kind of revert back to maybe something a little more passive or even diplomatically apologetic? The Biden administration didn't do that. So I think that threw the Chinese into a bit of a tizzy because they certainly were not expecting that. A Biden would be a continuation of kind of the Trump theme towards the U.S.-China competition. So
the Chinese misread those tea leaves.
I think they did. Of course, and they had a terrible time understanding Trump's behavior. Prior to that, the Chinese, I think they had a real science to understanding American leaders, how we make decisions, and the factors that go into that. Trump very much confused them, and I think Biden now is also confusing them because he's not acting the way that they thought he was supposed to act.
I want to continue on this, but just for people who may not know, there's some terminology out there that we hear a lot about. One is, I'll do these in reverse order. The New Silk Road Project. And can you explain what that is?
Well, so there's the terrestrial Silk Road, right? That are land routes to create trade connections, build highways, railroads, et cetera. There's the maritime belt, okay, which runs throughout Southeast Asia, around India, all the way up into the Mediterranean. And along the way, there's particular attention to development, infrastructure, ports, airports, et cetera, that then become the beginnings of outposts, right? And then those outposts will grow, and that I think it was Macedonia, all the way up to Macedonia is kind of the current endpoint. And so, I mean, it's been tremendously successful as not only trade routes, but investment routes and creating jobs in these countries.
And this is Belt and Road. You once said recently, you made the point that China doesn't plant flags. They don't go out and plant flags. That's sort of a Western colonial imperialist approach, if you will, maybe more European. What is it that China's doing in place of planting the flags? You mentioned the outposts and then the growth from there.
Well, so you look at China's, to the extent that China has a history of expansionist behavior, and they really don't in a physical sense. Now, what we know of China today, the map, really half of the, from the center to the west was brought into China under the Qing dynasty, right, the last dynasty. So that's still fairly recent. But even when China was the central kingdom, they didn't outright colonize Korea. They didn't outright colonize Vietnam. They didn't outright colonize things. They controlled the foreign affairs and kind of the military affairs of these countries, but they let the courts otherwise run them. Right. Very much different from the European colonial perspective, where we would go in and we would run these countries. So we would go in, plant the flag, say, you're ours. Right? Now, the Chinese dynastically would be, well, you're subjects, but you can keep your king, just don't call him an emperor, and follow our dictates every now and then, pay homage, etc. The Chinese Communist Party, look at their history the last 70 years, 70 years, they don't tend to invade contiguous territories looking to expand the territory. They've learned to use economics and public influence campaigns, right? They want the influence. They don't want to have to go to the hassle of occupying territory. I mean, they've been watching us do that for years, and they don't want any of it. Now, that's to this point. But with the Belt and Road Initiative, once you start building infrastructure, you got to protect it. And that infrastructure is now starting to be farther and farther away from your territory.
From home.
From home. So, what happens at that point? Would we see a change in China's behavior? Military bases, naval stations, these kinds of things. China has maybe 3-ish, 4 almost, kind of installations outside of China's territory. You line that up against what the U.S., the UK, and others have is nothing.
I think we have a few questions coming.
Thank you, Samaria.
Thank you, Samaria. Try not to jump around too much, but some people say, experts, whoever the experts are, you're the expert, that China is already now the #1 global power.
Nope.
It's not.
Nope.
During COVID, and we won't get into that too much, but during COVID, China, is this correct? China was the only economy to see growth.
Only economy?
Versus
Let's say maybe the only large economy, perhaps?
Large economy to see growth. Getting back to the China's not 10 feet tall, do you know about Evergrande?
I've read about it along with you guys and watched my stock portfolio respond accordingly. Yeah.
So is that an example of sort of this China's not 10 feet tall?
Yeah.
$3 billion in liability. Mm-hmm. It was a property company, but it was also a theme park company and a wealth management company and an entertainment company. Is that representative of a lot of what explosive growth that we're seeing in China?
You've seen these kinds of things in any developing country where this speculative spirit takes over, and people want to buy and consume more than they can afford, and so you go into debt. I mean, China's real estate market is a bubble. Its financial industry is largely a black box. right? No transparency, controlling information. You read the People's Daily, and you know what? Everything's still okay. You're going to be fine. And so there's so much that we don't know. There's so much we can't see. And as China has to kind of open the books a little bit with regard to what it's doing, because it has foreign investors who have leverage.
So they will have to open the books. Yeah,
to some extent,
to some
right.
extent, yeah.
Now, cooking the books, a whole nother story. They're very good at that. They inflate their economic data. The story recently about the former World Bank director who had China's annual report adjusted upwards at the request of the Chinese. So she's in hot water for that. But yeah, that speculation is rampant. And now, again, right, Xi Jinping is the one that's going to have to come in and clean house, and as a form of corruption, control it. And so look to see what the party's response is to the Evergrande situation.
Getting to some of the questions from the audience, this is relevant, and it speaks to what we were just discussing. Do you think the USA has damaged its relationship with Chinese neighbors in recent years, for example, South Korea, Japan, ASEAN? And what changes in the U.S. government behavior would you expect to see? So one, have we damaged our relations with neighbors over there?
It's always a mixed bag, because there's what there's what people say publicly, and then there's what we're saying and doing privately. There's what folks say with regard to their domestic audience, and then what they actually are saying to their allies, for us, for example. The bilateralism of Trump, the effort to make the South Koreans pay an exorbitantly increase in the portion they pay for American military support. The Japanese were never quite sure where we were going to fall on things. There were trade conflicts, not just with our Asian allies, but I mean, my Scotch whiskey has gone up the roof, and it's still too high. Molasses from Canada, so there was damage done, but at the same time, the relationships didn't fall apart. Right? They might have frayed in some regards, but they didn't fall apart. The change in the hoped-for change, I think, is taking place with a much more multilateral approach to working with our allies in the context of containing China. And so, whether it's selling or providing nuclear submarines to Australia, the next big arms package to Taiwan, allowing South Korea to stay out of the Indo-Pacific Alliance as any kind of formal member, increasing kind of the vocalness of our unquestionable support for Japan as part of our security treaty. And these are all good things. And then finding ways to connect the dots with East Asia and the Indo-Pacific, and to make everybody feel like there might actually be security in numbers.
This is a good entry into a few other questions. Speaking of the neighborhood over there, China, I believe, shares a border with 14 different countries. Is that correct?
There's a bunch.
Something like that. One of the questions, please comment on China-India relations and the recent incursions into the line of control.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It's one of the neighbors.
Yeah, it's one of the neighbors. It's a heavily disputed border area. What happened was it last year with spike clubs and all that, and I mean, it's incredible. The relationship is obviously not good. The extent of economic penetration of China's economic penetration of India is I don't think is as excessive as it is with other neighbors in the region. India very much wants to stake claim to the Indian Ocean and understands that their access to the United States through the Pacific has to cut through the South China Sea. And so there's a lot of reasons for India to be a bit concerned, which is great for us in trying to develop the Indo-Pacific Alliance. But I mean, there's some historical issues with regard to the border area in the very north, and I don't I don't see either side resolving those anytime soon, and I would imagine the United States will go out of our way to make sure that doesn't get resolved.
We can't have this discussion without mentioning Taiwan. Taiwan is a potential flashpoint. Taiwan is critical to U.S.-China relations, correct? Can you speak about the situation, the status of Taiwan and China, but also how that fits into the U.S.? And I'll add, are you familiar with TECRO?
Oh, yes, very much.
So TECRO is the Taipei Economic
Cultural Representative Office in the U.S. Yeah.
Taiwan is not a country, so it does not have an embassy. But
Taiwan, well, the Republic of China, which is the formal name of Taiwan, does not have formal diplomatic relations with the United States government.
Thank you.
It is an entity that has been self-administered certainly since 1949 and the founding of the PRC, never administered by the PRC, and was only administered by the Republic of China for 4 years up until 1949. It was a Japanese colony from 1895 to 1945. But I'm sorry, go ahead. I know a little bit about Taiwan.
You know a lot about Taiwan. Well, I apologize, I'm not sure if this is Don or Dan asked. Professor Stockton, in your opinion, how aggressive will Xi be in having Taiwan united with China?
Oh, that's a no doubt, no-brainer situation. The PRC will not allow foreign powers to kind of permanently separate Taiwan, and they use that allow foreign powers as stock and trade to their responses. Taiwan is, it's a historical. It's a piece of China's humiliation that is yet to be returned to the unified motherland. It is of geostrategic importance, it is of economic importance, and it is certainly of technological importance because it dominates, along with Samsung and other South Korean firms, the semiconductor industry. So there are a lot of reasons that China would never allow permanent separation, but it is heartfelt when they say we're not going to. We will do everything we can to prevent that, including invading Taiwan. That's the pivot point the U.S. has been kind of trying to balance for a long time since the Taiwan Relations Act.
So status quo for a while.
Well, the problem is,
sort of.
Scholars and policy wonks will argue all day long about what exactly the status quo is anymore. Right. And so the current U.S.-Taiwan relationship looks nothing like it did 10 years ago. It's closer, it's more active. It is the United States, you'll find Department of State people referring to Taiwan in public comments as a country, which in one hand, yeah, it is. It is a self-governing territory that has a constitution, collects its own taxes, and protects itself. And so, State Department, when our Secretary of State makes those comments and he includes the word country, that's not an accident. That's not a slip of the tongue. It's a signal. Arms sales packages selling Taiwan advanced F-16s, under the Trump administration, the largest arms sales packages just imaginable. Biden has continued that, not on that scale yet, but there's bound to be something considerable down the road.
This is a question that I think is on the minds of a lot of people, and we hear this a lot. How serious is China's economic stranglehold on the U.S. in terms of trade imbalance and national debt?
Yeah. So there are a whole lot of people that own a piece of us when it comes to our debt. China's portion is kind of the largest single entity. But, if you throw in, tax havens, like the Isle of Man owns a surprising amount of American debt. But it's a kind of a mutual prisoner situation because if the Chinese damage our economy, They damage the value of the debt we owe. I mean, the worst thing they could do is harm our economy, and that will cost them buku amounts of money. And so I don't worry so much about China playing the national debt card or trying to collapse our economy. Now, if things ever came to blows and got kinetic, sure. I mean, all bets are off. But the other part of that was, it wasn't just the debt, it was...
The trade imbalance.
Yeah, the trade imbalance. Hey, man, all it takes is for you guys to decide to pay 3 times as much for your Tupperware at Costco and X amount more for the cheap electronics that we live on to really reduce that economic the extent of integration. The Trump administration threw out words like de-link the American economy from China. That's not realistic at all. I mean, certainly we do want to take a very long time to kind of gradually get into that. Now, we could reduce our economic dependence on China, but that's up to the American consumer, the American banking industry, the corporations, et cetera. So small steps could be taken fairly easily.
We're quickly closing in on the end of a short evening, but do you see any particular flashpoints for conflict with the U.S. and China?
In terms of kinetic?
Kinetic,
yeah.
Correct.
Well, Taiwan is always number one flashpoint. South China Sea is a close, very very close second place, if not tied for first these days. The East China Sea, an encounter with Korean or Japanese vessels or aircraft might draw us into a conflict as well. But as far as anyone planning on wanting something like to happen, nobody wants a shooting war.
Right.
The chances are, though, that if there is a kinetic conflict in the next 5 years, it's going to be because of an accident. It's going to be another Hainan Island, U.S. spy plane being bumped down or being shot down. It's going to be an accident, ships colliding. The Chinese, naval forces get awfully close to American forces in the South China Sea in particular. You have an accident involving that kind of equipment with that many people. That's what worries me the most, is something that really wasn't intended.
There are so many more questions and areas we could cover. The cyber threat, of course, we've talked about the economic threat, the military threat. Do you think economic integration is the one thing that would actually prevent a war?
Well, there's a really neat, argument about economic integration. It goes all the way. Well, it goes. A good starting point is the Bretton Woods Conference in the summer of 1944, and you listen to the reasons behind economic integration. At the time, it was to prevent the economic kind of race to the bottom that helped feed World War II and the rise of fascism. Trade wars, currency devaluations, all this other stuff. So the road to peace was economic integration. The Schuman Plan, the European Coal and Steel Commission, what became the European Union. All right, the French and the Germans haven't gone after each other for a longer stretch of time now than I think previously. So that economic integration really worked in the favor of U.S.-China relations. The flip side is that economic integration empowered and fed the rise of China to the point now where they want to make the rules, right? They don't want to listen to what everybody has always been telling them to do. So it's almost kind of curvilinear. But it is still a very, very important break to something becoming kinetic, because there is a whole lot of money to lose on either side, on both sides, if things really went sideways.
I'm going to throw out this last question. If we are on the road to strategic challenge, should the U.S. and other allies make a push to diversify manufacturing away from China?
Yeah.
Is strategic ambiguity in regards to China-USA-Taiwan relations a strategic mistake?
So absolutely diversify supply chains, and we're starting to see the beginnings of that. Taiwan investment in the United States, whether it be Foxconn, Taiwan Semiconductor, or Formosa Plastics, has done nothing but just grow in the last 4 or 5 years. Whether So, that kind of relationship building helps relieve us somewhat of supply chain issues with China. But again, re-engaging our trade partners in Asia, maybe re-engaging things like what used to be known as the free trade area, oh my gosh, TIFA, no, the Pacific Free Trade.
TPP?
Yeah, that one.
TPP.
I got my acronyms all mixed up. So re-engaging with efforts like that, whether it's transistors, rare earth minerals, or whatever the case might be. Strategic ambiguity depends what kind of mood I'm in. Strategic ambiguity is the ambiguity the United States maintains with regard to whether or not we will actually go to war to defend Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act guarantees us to kind of make sure that Taiwan has the means to defend itself. That does not, it doesn't say anywhere in there that we will send aircraft carriers to go into combat against PLA forces. So we keep the Chinese guessing. They don't exactly know what our red line is there. It was also put in place to keep the Taiwanese guessing. Because the last thing we really want, the United States, is to have to go to war against China over really anything. We didn't want pro-independence-minded forces in Taiwan to go, the Americans have my back, I'm going to declare independence, thus forcing the issue and dragging the Americans in. The younger President Bush, like weeks after his inauguration in 2001, was being interviewed on ABC, Good Morning America, something, was asked about Taiwan and what the U.S. would do, and he responded, we'll do whatever it takes. The phones lit up. I mean, there was all sorts of just frantic. Did he really mean what he said, and did he know what he just said? The American representative to Taiwan and the American Institute in Taiwan, I forget her name, and exactly what year, but at one point they're at a dinner party with then Taiwan's President Chen Shui-bian. This is 2000 to 2008, and supposedly she whispered into his ear that the United States was his guardian angel. She didn't keep the job very long, okay? And so that strategic ambiguity, some people see it as kind of chaotic and messy, and somebody needs to take a stand. Others see it as extremely useful in keeping everybody guessing so nobody wants to push it.
Which is a perfect segue into a repeat of the question, China, friend or foe?
Yes.
Yes. How's that for an answer?
I'm not optimistic about the relationship whatsoever. I think things will come to a head of some kind. And we used to talk about 20 and 30 years. Then we talk about 10 to 20 years. But now we talk in kind of 5 to 10, 5-ish years. So that horizon towards us kind of collectively coming to this realization that things will come to a head is really in the single digits now. And I'm not saying go to war, right? I'm just saying that somebody's going to have to kind of realize who the top dog is, right? Read up your Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War, the history of. If you haven't read it in a long time, reread the Melian dialogue. Athens, told the Melians, the strong do what the strong will do and the weak do what the weak must do. I paraphrase. But that's the moment of kind of encounter, is that the American government is going to demand that China do something that serves our national interest better, and they're going to say no. And or the Chinese are going to tell the Americans, no, you can't do that, and we're going to do it. Right? And so what are those moments? Right? That's going to be things like Taiwan, South China Sea, cyber threat. We didn't talk about that tonight, but that's certainly there. So I'm not terribly optimistic, but also nobody does want war, and we're not at that point yet in kind of the way we talk about China, the way we talk about the Communist Party. It's a challenger, there's no doubt.
Well, we are out of time. We could go on for much longer. For anyone interested in following current events in China further, more closely, students or anyone in the audience, recommended reading sources? People's Daily. Sorry.
Well, yeah. People's Daily is that's a good place to start. Things are so dynamic now. When you consume something, make sure you realize, all right, so this is a history of China written in 2021 or 2018, whatever, that is going to maybe look and sound and feel a little different a couple of years from now. I spent a lot of my time reading op-ed and opinion editorial pieces, whether it's foreign policy, foreign affairs. There's some online venues like the Diplomat has really extensive coverage on Asia, East Asia, South Asia. The Economist is an old standby. They do a pretty good job. But if you just read if you read the Financial Times, make sure you read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. I mean, basically make that your trifecta, because the perspectives are starting to really separate out, and you're going to get the same kind of tone and message from each of these venues. So make sure you mix it up.
Very good advice. And any students out here or any parents of students, if University of St. Thomas, you want to learn more from this gentleman?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ray.
Get a plug in. We're both Aggies, by the way.
Gig 'em.
So,
well, you're not going to let me get my plug in. The cane is
please.
yanking me off the stage. No,
Please, no, get your plug in.
I just want to say how much of a treat it is to speak with y'all tonight, to be invited by the World Affairs Council to share this time on the stage with you, Ray. Speaking to World Affairs Council audiences is always a treat, because y'all are the sharpest audiences I could ever be in front of. You keep me honest. And so I really appreciate the invitation to be here.
Oh, well, likewise. We're very grateful, and thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone.